Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's presentation. Cybercrime is on the rise. Are you prepared? I'm Laura Schaefer, and I'm the Director of Channel Marketing at Island. Just a few quick things before we get started today. We are recording today's webinar. During the presentation, we hope you'll submit any question you may have and we'll respond as soon as possible. If we don't have time during the webinar, we'll follow up with you after the presentation. And now I'd like to turn the time over to today's panelists, Drew Close, Patrick McGarry, George Just, and Jack Bailey.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Drew Close. I'm a global consultant with C3 Technology Advisors, and it's my pleasure to be with you today. C3 advises enterprise clients in a variety of different areas, including wide area networking, SD-WAN, co-location, cloud services, top players to help deliver in these efforts. So today we're going to be taking a look at a proactive approach and a reactive approach to preparing for cyber threats. So we're going to look at securing the gate, and everyone's kind of familiar with that first line of defense.
Drew, I think we've lost your audio. I'm not sure what's going on here, but we can't hear you. Your audio is cutting in and out.
Okay, thanks for that. Let's see.
Okay.
We can hear you now.
Okay. Are we good on audio now?
Sounds
Super.
great.
Okay. So I'll back up just a second. We study the marketplace and we bring together the best providers to help clients deliver meaningful business outcomes. Today, we're going to look at share some information that hopefully helps you in your mitigation efforts as you prepare for cyber threats. So go ahead and advance there, Jack. Most people are familiar with cyber threats in the landscape. Everything from your script kiddies banging on the website trying to break in, all the way to nation state actors looking to exfiltrate credit card information or pertinent business information, or just lock up your network and ask for really cyber ransom. So cyber threats are more than that, though. Anything that can disrupt your business and the ability to conduct normal operations is a cyber threat. In talking with clients, some common themes that we see are illustrated up here. And I'm not going to go through each one of these, but it is worth spending just a minute on it, and we're going to dive into one at the end here. So go ahead and advance, Jack. So accidental deletion, I can't tell you the number of clients who have suffered data loss from accidental deletion, whether that's production data or backup, it's all a real threat. So accidental deletion, we're going to cover that just by way of adjacency. Next. Retention gaps. This one, there's nothing worse than getting a call to restore from a point that doesn't exist, or restore from a point that is corrupt. And it happens. We've heard it. And if you're an IT practitioner, you've probably seen this as well. Next. Natural disasters speak for themselves, and sometimes clients will say, hey, look, there's nothing really bad that happens here. And it's not that your roof is getting torn off or that you're getting flooded, but you have to worry about those dependencies, whether it's power or connectivity. And clients tell us sometimes, like, you know what, we kind of have a plan, but it doesn't really happen here. And that's what the folks in New York said before Hurricane Sandy hit. A well-documented example of, look, we should be okay, but it has to be part of your cyber threat mitigation plan. Next. Here's where the meat of this is. Malicious insiders and departing employees. It's been my experience that this makes IT pros bristle a little bit. And if you've been in the industry a long time, you probably have gotten that call, a drop everything call, because an employee is let go or discovered to have access that they shouldn't have. And it's for good reason. So privilege misuse is the #2 cause of cybersecurity incidents today. And maybe it's somebody that is gainfully employed still, but they're snooping around trying to find, places maybe that they shouldn't be going within the network. So we have to mitigate against those threats, and that's part of our discussion today as well. Next slide. The bottom line is this: the cost of businesses and the frequency of cyber attacks is increasing. And we haven't even touched on the hockey stick increase in ransomware. Ransomware is like, the hot topic today. And even the small businesses are trying to figure out, how do we put a plan in place to guard against this? The enterprises, with a mountain of money, are always trying to keep up on this because they don't want to end up in the news as well. So how do we plan for all of this stuff? It sounds like a lot. Next. I'm sure you're familiar with the NIST framework, and George, I'm going to hand off to you in a second, but the NIST framework is going to give us some starting places. And we don't have time to unpack all of the nuances of each of the components, but we will look at 2 components today: the protect and the recover. So please know that at C3, we're of the opinion that there's no one silver bullet to safeguarding your company's digital assets. You have to be investigating what is new, what is out there, how can we continue to bolster our security posture. And we're going to talk through here should be used in concert with other tools. So let's check the front gate first. I'm going to hand off to Threat Blocker. And we've asked Threat Blocker to join us today, and we want, George, would you take us through a little bit about Threat Blocker and where you guys fit into this notion of protection?
Yeah, thanks, Drew, and thanks everybody for coming. So, one of the things that we talk about, especially in protection, and this is where we focus a lot of our efforts. And one of the things you have to concern yourself with in a lot of traditional ways of looking at this is what exploit and what am I being attacked with, right? So we don't necessarily focus on that. We focus more on who's doing the attack, right? So if I can tell you that we have a pretty good indication that there are, 30 million or so bad actors out there, and they're the same guys every time. But today they're exploiting log4j, or last month they were exploiting log4j, and tomorrow they're trying to do something else, and maybe they're doing a DNS attack, or maybe they're going to be in the ransomware business this week. Wouldn't it be good if you could just turn them off and unplug them and not let them anywhere near your network? And that's really what we do. So there is a lot of work being done by a lot of folks in a lot of different places to turn an unknown threat into a known threat. And the biggest thing that we can do to help is, why not eliminate the known threats from even having to be re-investigated on every single connection that comes into your network. And so what we do in a very efficient manner is to be able to just eliminate all of them in one simple clock tick, right? In one millisecond, eliminate them for being a problem in your network. And that's really what we come. So go ahead and click forward, Jack. Thanks. So it doesn't matter what type it is. It's who's doing the action. So we make a pretty simple statement here, and that is, and this should be blatantly obvious, but it needs to be restated sometimes. There is nobody, the least sophisticated enterprise to the most sophisticated enterprise, that doesn't have some measure of security installed. Every network has a firewall on it somewhere, and yet every breach and every successful cyber attack that you read about, we just saw the stat that Drew showed, every 11 seconds something happens, and every one of them got past a firewall. There is no one of them that didn't get past a firewall. They all got through a firewall. So what does that mean? Does that mean firewalls aren't doing anything? Well, of course it doesn't mean that. I mean, firewalls are doing a heck of a good job at doing what they can do. But what they can't handle is the absolute sheer volume of the attack surface, right? Of the overwhelming force that is the cybersecurity threat and the different ways that they all come at you. So because of that, there's different ways you have to address and mitigate those risks. So, you know, if you could accept that, you know, first of all, which is a blatant obvious fact, that every threat did move through a firewall and that firewalls can't handle it, just that's the obvious outcome of that. They wouldn't be breaching every 11 seconds if firewalls could handle what the risk is. You know, then you have to do something else. So why can't they catch every threat? You know, why can't you use these other methods, which have been around for a while? You know, next gen, Pat will probably say it in 5 minutes if I don't say it, but next gen firewall, that is a 20-year-old term at this point. It's obviously not next gen firewall anymore, right? So other things have had to come across to handle what a firewall can't do. So security stacks can't catch every threat. That should be obvious just from the stats. And being able to update firewall rule sets and firewall updates and being able to keep up with the threat intelligence that is available has become just completely impossible to do. So this is where we enter into it. Go ahead and click, Jack. So what we do is to take all of it, and as I said, this is tens of millions of threat actors, right? Using all different methods of threats and all different ways to get in your network. And we simply just block them all. And that doesn't mean we block everybody, you know, just turn off the network except that which is whitelisted. That's not what that means. It means we know where the bad guys are and we eliminate them from being a source of, you know, annoyance in your network on one hand, right? Don't even let them in your network. And we're able to update that consistently, and we're able to be able to deploy that and then block upon that instantly, right? And be able to keep that up to date and be able to simplify it and not have it be this, you know, I have threat intelligence, but I've got 10 million indicators, but my firewall can only handle 100,000, right? That's a simple problem that existing solutions just can't handle. So how do I handle the volume and then handle the updates and the curation of all that data? And that's something we bring. So click forward. And then there's one other piece that I think is extraordinarily important. So that is inbound threats. They leak through the firewall. How do we handle that? But equally important is outbound threats. So if you click one more forward, these are, and Drew mentioned this is the, you know, ticked off former employee or about to be former employee. This is somebody that's already in the network. They already passed the firewall. This is a compromised machine. This is somebody coming in with, you know, an infected mobile phone, logging into your network and trying to exfiltrate data. They're past the firewall already. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to notice them after the threat is in place, the attack is in place, and then shut them down? We're going to block them on the way out. So it's a very efficient way to do all that. So block inbound, block outbound, based on a known threat landscape. That is what we do very, very well, do it very efficiently and easily, very straightforward. Can be installed right away and done quickly. And that's something that we'll talk about a little bit more later. I think Drew will talk about, you know, how we can instantly show you what we can do as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Pat, and you can click forward and Pat can show you how we do all this. Not only that, we do all.
Excellent. Thank you so much, George. And thanks to the C3 and ILAN teams for having us. This is really good to be able to talk to everybody about cybersecurity today. So if you could do one more build out, if you wouldn't mind, Jack. Thanks. So, you know, George really hit on this, and it's really about, you know, realizing that you have a problem, right? Step one, right? You know, get out of denial, right? And it's kind of funny you say that, and it applies to so many things in life, but it applies to cybersecurity as well. And what that basically means is a really simple thing. Just know that the bad guys are smart, because they are. They're smart. So how do you deal with that problem once you realize that they're smart? Well, you got to leverage all the smart good guys that are out there. That's what the top of this slide is showing you. We partner with the best names in the business, household names in cybersecurity, Webroot, Domain Tools, Proofpoint, our Department of Homeland Security here in the US, so various ISACs and ISALs, big, huge names like Recorded Future, tiny little names like Fiodo's open source trackers. If it's out there and it's got value, we partner with it. Why? Because we want to leverage every good guy that's out there not just the good guys in one firewall company, but the good guys across the globe generating all this great data. So we pull all that data into our cloud-based management platform. It runs lock, stock, and barrel in AWS. And it's obviously multi-zone available and all that fun stuff. Beauty of AWS, right? Everybody does that now. It's great. We pull all that stuff into AWS, curate all of it in real time, pull all that data in, layer in customer specific feed information. You can bring any data you want to the table. You don't just got to use our partners. You can use anything you want. We have a whole bunch of industry standard open source connectors that you can use to do that, including allowed lists from the big names like Google, Microsoft, and whatnot to make sure that false positives are mitigated. All that data then gets pushed back out to our threat blocker edge node devices running our threat blocker edge software stack. This basically makes these either both low-end appliances from Lanner, there's set-top boxes all the way up to rack mount Dell servers if you want to deploy there for 10 gig and higher environments, to allow you to operate as a layer 2 bump on the wire and do what George mentioned. Whenever an inbound or an outbound attack vector is happening, we stop it and we tell you we stopped it and why we stopped it, because Webroot says it's really bad and here's why, or because DHS and 3 other denied lists say it's bad and here's why. And we log all that data in industry standard syslog exports. If you do one more build out, Jack, you'll see the bottom of the slide will pop up here. And we can export that data to any number of locations of the customer's choosing. At ThreatBlocker, we strongly believe in the privacy of this data. We do not collect any of the endpoint data ourselves. That data is the customer's data, your data, you decide where it goes. And that allows us to block every threat. We can feed that data back into our system if you choose to, or you can leave it in your own systems. Like we have tons of people that like pipe it into IBM QRadar or Splunk. You know, people are bazillionaires that can afford those things. Some people just pipe it into things like Azure Sentinel, right? It doesn't matter where you send the data, it's just RFC compliant syslog data. And that's the key. That last thing, again, I'll say it one more time. Block every threat, not just a couple of things, but block everything you know about. And that's what we do. And I'll pass it back over to Drew.
Excellent. Thanks, Pat and George, for that. Threat blocker is something that I'm recommending to my clients as a first line of defense. And you see that the efficiency and the amount of threat intelligence that they're bringing, it's complementary to what you have maybe in place from MDR or an EDR perspective. But even as good as it is, we need to be prepared for the insider threat. George, you hit on this earlier, that the USB drive that deploys code in the environment or an email with a payload that's gotten past the best defenses. So in that case, what do we do from there? It's already on the inside and there's bad code being deployed. I'd like to ask Jack Bailey from Island to talk just about that. Where does Island fit into this? Where do you fit into mitigating cyber threats?
Yeah, so great presentation, George and Pat. Thanks for all that great information on ThreatBlocker. And Drew, definitely a great transition. I'm a huge advocate of defense in depth, but I'm also an understander of, as Drew just mentioned, ultimately, if something can happen, humans are error prone, things can happen, right? I also am fortunate enough to live in Houston, Texas, and I know all too well about that tenfold increase in natural disasters that Drew was mentioning earlier. So the reality is that regardless of the threat to an organization's environment, if and when, more commonly when these days, something occurs, having a trusted plan of recovery, right? Going back to the NIST framework that Drew was talking about before, protect the environment, but also have a plan, and a validated plan at that being a key piece to be able to bring systems back online. Now, obviously, there are several different layers to an environment of doing defense and protection, and also for recovery. Backup is a huge one, but I'm going to focus very specifically on disaster recovery today, as that can be a really big element for recovering from any of these threats that we're talking about, and then some. Now, I've had the pleasure of working in the DR space for about 16 years now, and what I see time and time again is that there's been this shift from organizations thinking of a disaster recovery plan as a nice to have to thinking much more as it being a must have, right? And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? All the threats we've been talking about leading organizations to say, hey, I need to be prepared. There's also this end user expectation that you all know on the call, right? I'm preaching to the choir here, that your end users just don't accept downtime as readily as they did 15, 20 years ago, right? There's been this evolution to the always on data center, always on information piece. And so organizations know this. What I'd like to position though, in terms of DR, is not just any plan will do. There's a much more efficient way and a much more validated way to do DR than a lot of organizations do in-house, right? And the biggest focus I want to talk through real fast is this approach of moving away from a traditional DR site and really embracing the cloud as the capable way of doing that. And a few pieces of why not just any cloud's the same in this. So for those of you that are on the call that have had the pleasure of doing this in the past or are currently doing your own DR site, you know that there's a lot of choices that have to be made. There's the first choice of, do I want to have just enough to get by? Do I want to have full capacity and incur all the costs associated with having the hardware on demand or previously procured for me to be able to leverage? You already know that there's a lot of overhead because it's not just like the equipment sits there. There's patching, there's vulnerability, there's updates, there's all the things we've been talking about, making sure both sites work well. And then the last thing is this big growing challenge around performance limitations. Again, I'm speaking to you all today that know this even better than I do. So many organizations have seen data growth explode, and they've seen their production data doubling every 3 to 5 years now, and even more so in some organizations. And it's so difficult to keep up with that growth at both sides of the equation. Drew mentioned before around the retention gap. Organizations struggle with the fact that, hey, if I'm running out of production capacity, how am I going to keep up with keeping enough days or months or weeks a year for backup? How do I keep enough DR capacity to when something happens and my data is corrupted, encrypted, or modified? How do I go back in time? How do I find a healthy place? So all these are issues that you run into when you try to do disaster recovery yourself, right? And so this is really where Island fits into the picture. Now, many of you may not be familiar with Island. Some of you may be. Island's pretty well known in the space for DR. We have been the leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for disaster recovery as a service 4 years in a row. And a big piece that I'm going to describe to you in a moment, but a big piece of that is just alleviating the big challenges I mentioned before. Everything with Island is on-demand resources. You simply subscribe to the storage you need to replicate data off-site, and then you have access to the CPU, RAM, networking capabilities, all that on demand, which is a huge thing. That helps offset costs tremendously. The management piece is eliminated, and then the capacity growth is such a big element of that, where as you grow in your production environment, we can assist with that. So just keep that in mind. That's one big thing about working with Island as an organization, is you get a lot of this heritage, a lot of this experience and capabilities, but you get to consume it in a way that makes sense. Frankly, to me, this is what the cloud was meant for. On demand, high performance, exactly what you need when you need it type resources. And that's our model for disaster recovery, and of course for backup and production and other things like that as well. But where I want to dig in just one final layer here is the Island approach to treating your disaster recovery site like a future production environment. And I would challenge anyone on the call today that if you are planning disaster recovery, you need to think of that site as the ultimately what will be your production environment when you fail over and when you have that mission critical event where recovery is the only option. So Island's approach to that is making it a seamless experience. So Island runs VMware on our environment. We have these pre-check compatibility tools that we'll talk about with Drew in a moment called Catalyst to make sure your data will run in our environment and that it'll work well when it gets to our environment. But beyond that, knowing that this is a future production environment, we want you to know exactly what it will cost while you're running in the environment. We want you to have the connectivity you need. Believe it or not, a lot of cloud providers and a lot of the biggest ones out there, the AWS, the Azures, the Google Cloud, all the networking is sold separately. One application gateway, want a VPN gateway, want any connectivity to the environment at all, want to pull data out of the environment, all that's sold separately. You have to convert the data to bring it in. You have to convert the data to pull it out. So it's a really big thing of having that compatibility, that experience, that expertise. While you're running in the environment, and Pat and Georgia spoke this so well of how important prevention is, we also give our customers at no additional cost a full suite of security tools from Trend Micro, from Tenable, Nessus, and VMware tools that allow you as a customer to continue to secure your data while it's in our environment, as well as built-in backup options and additional DR to other Island sites. And again, all of it's powered on a VMware-based platform where you know how to use it when you get into the environment. So just to wrap that piece up, it's so important to protect the perimeter, to protect all the layers of your environment, and to work with the threat blocker and C3 teams on that element. But ultimately, at the end of the day, with human error, with natural disasters, with all the other elements that can and will cause downtime, it's important to have a validated plan. And we at Island believe that there's a much better approach than a do-it-yourself or going to public cloud approach with it, where you can still be highly cost effective, but also get the connectivity, the security, and the compatibility that makes it all successful. With that, Drew, I'll pass it back to you.
Sure. So we talked at high level on a couple of things. In C3, we've got a ton of options in the portfolio. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we're advising clients to take a proactive and a reactive approach to guarding against cyber threats. Now, this isn't a one-size-fits-all. There are assessments to get you started on, where do we start and build this framework? Or, we have something in place, but, we want to take a look, is this going to carry the load if we've got a DR event? And I'm going to tell you something specifically. Is that I had a client that failed over to DR as a test, and they couldn't fail back. This stuff really happens, and so I'd be curious, if folks on the call have had the same experience. But where I want to go with this is, what do we do from here? If you're working with a C3 advisor, get in touch with them and let them know that you want to know more. We've got a team of folks that can help with that. If you're not working with a C3 advisor yet, you just met one. Okay, so my email address is up here. You can email me at dklos@c3techadvisors.com, and we'll start with a conversation to understand where you're at, where you want to go, and then make some recommendations. So go ahead and hit the next slide. This is fantastic, and I appreciate Island and Threat Blocker for doing this. You can get a free assessment from both of these camps, and this means so much because it sounds great. It looks like, it could be helpful, but we've all seen the architecture. Does it really work? Can you guys show me? Can you prove to me that this is going to be worth my time, worth my effort? So the Catalyst tool that Jack mentioned is going to give you an idea of what's in your environment, what is ready for protection, where are the gaps at, and give you an idea of what the aggregate resource pools in your environment look like. How much RAM, how much CPU, how much disk. And then you can take a look at, of these machines, what's nice to protect, must protect, and absolutely critical. And then you can build out a rough order of magnitude cost based on that. What does it cost to protect this today? And then also, what does it cost to fail over and run it? So, Jack, if there's any other comments you want to make on that, and then I'm going to describe a little bit about the threat blocker.
Yeah, Drew, so well stated on that. Team, the other thing that Catalyst does a good job of, as I mentioned, is it will basically also look at what version your machines are, what VMware version they are, what hardware version they are, and making sure that they're going to run in our environment prior to you doing any replication, right? We want the pre-sales and post-sales delivery to be incredibly smooth. The other thing it can do is it can do connectivity check to identify which of our 10 global regions is the right one for our customers, to make sure they get the geographic diversity that they want for DR, but that they also have a really good end user connectivity story when that occurs.
Excellent. And I personally have seen this run with clients, and there's a number of tools out there. Rob Ware, has got one, RV Tools, but this is more comprehensive. And so if this sounds interesting, you can let me know, or your C3 advisor know, hey, let's check out that Catalyst tool. I think it's going to be pretty helpful. Even if you decide, not right now, it's going to give you some good information. Now on the threat blocker side, one of the things that I challenged, Pat and George with is, look, if a client is interested, but doesn't want to go into, a full-blown POC, can we still get a look at, is this going to be effective? What do we do with that? And so, Pat, if you would just describe, a 30-day capture of firewall logs, is that going to do it? Can we send that to you? What would that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. When we first started talking with you and the ILAN team, and I saw that the ILAN Catalyst has these great capabilities, and I love this kind of stuff, right? And it also shows that C3 and your tech advisors are looking at partners and technology that people can actually see what happens, right? No architecture, and that's what we do. So we have a threat blocker assessment program. It's free. All you have to do is upload your firewall logs. And if you don't want to for some reason, you can redact them. All we need is the list of IP addresses that your firewall allowed through and the date and time of those events for any duration that you want. We've had people send us for 30 minutes, for a day, for a week, for a month. Any size, it doesn't matter. You can work directly with our technical advisors on our teams or with the C3 folks to get this done. And it's trivial to do. You upload them typically to a Google Drive location, or if you don't want to do that, you can send them anywhere you want and give us the link, or we can get it by other means. We run it through our systems in minutes and give you the answers. And the answers show up as a really simple one-page PDF of the likeness you see on the screen here. It tells you how many different inbound and outbound connections, if the data is available in the logs that you give us, that would have been allowed through by your firewall that we would have blocked for you. So this is not meant to badmouth the firewall. It's meant to show you that there are things still getting through it because the bad guys are smart and no one vendor can know about all the bad guys, which is why we partner with some of the other vendors that are out there. We also give you a smattering of the different countries that are allowed through, how many different ASNs they tie to, being ASNs, if you're not familiar with the term, are just a kind of a technical way of saying an ISP by another name, so to speak. And then what threat categories these things showed up in. You know, a lot of people are, kind of have blinders on. They think they're protected, but then they see that all of a sudden they're letting through command and control, botnets, right? Phishing attacks, things that are blatantly obvious to us from our third-party threat intelligence partners that we can show you would have been blocked by us. And the beauty of the way this works now is that you can rest assured if you had been deployed with us in your networks, all these things would have been blocked. Simple as that. Makes for a proof of concept real simple. It really helps when you're making the pitch in your own companies about why this should happen. And people are always going to say, well, have you tried it yet? No, but I sent them our logs and look at all the stuff we let through. And it doesn't have to be a firewall, by the way. It can be any security control at your disposal in your network. Anything that has IP addresses and date stamps that this has gotten through your network, we can double check it for you. Real simple.
That's great. I appreciate that so much, guys, because it helps when we're recommending these to our clients that, look, we can get a look at this. And Pat, just as you said, is this going to be effective? Is this worth taking more time and investing in? Because at the end of the day, you don't have a lot of extra time to entertain the goat rodeo from every particular vendor that's out there. It should be worth my time. Here's your quick litmus test. So a couple things, some questions that I had. If a client is or a business is not doing business overseas, can you just turn that off? George, you mentioned this before. With the flick of the switch, you can turn this off. Is it really that easy?
Yeah, so country blocking is one of the things that we can do really quickly, right? So but what's as important as turning it off is being able to selectively turn it back on. So just simply turning off a region is one thing, but when Google has a data center somewhere that you have to access, or Microsoft has an O365 instance somewhere in a country that you're otherwise blocking, you have to have a way that comes back in, and that's something we do, in our natural course of how we go to business, right? And Pat mentioned it too. The good list is important as the bad list, right? So we integrate with all those things, and Zoom and everybody else, so you're able to make sure that those are in place. So it is 2 clicks away, and quite literally 2 clicks away to be able to block things in mass like that. And we actually talked, and just anecdotally anyway, but there's a couple of customers. We had one, Pat, I think there was somebody you talked to. They said they had hundreds of thousands, if not a million lines of code put together in their firewall just to do country blocking, right? It was a significant level of firewall rule set that was put in place in order to do country blocking, and then that's all it was doing. And that's something that for us is it's not necessarily easy to do, but it's something that we do very straightforwardly and efficiently.
Right. Thanks for that. And one other question, I'm going to flip this to Jack before we open it up for questions and answers from the audience. Is, one of the things that I've heard from clients is, look, I didn't have a crumbling disaster where the entire organization went down, but we are in a data retention gap. We've missed something in the backup, and we need to restore something small. It's not a full-blown 5-alarm disaster. Do you guys still help with that? I mean, like just an object within a backup, like, can you get real granular?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and again, I love the way you talked about the Catalyst tool a minute ago. This is one of the really interesting things to work with the C3 team and working with Catalyst is that same analysis you do for DR as a service can also do a BAS analysis, backup as a service analysis at the same time. And for a lot of organizations, they can look and say, what makes sense? Backup and DR are very complementary to each other, right? Backup's typically more around that granularity piece. DR is more around having a new environment to fail over to. But to answer the question, Drew, specifically, between either of the approaches we have with DR as a service, we can get very granular. And again, I know your team can help your customers understand what machines belong together. What are the dependencies? If you fail over, you may have 15, 50, 200 machines in your environment. Would you really fail over all 200, or would you be more granular in that? And when it comes to restores, it's the same thing. Would you want to bring back an entire machine, or would you just want to file or folder? And the short answer is we can help with both of them. I know your team and Drew, with your expertise, can talk and help customers with that piece, but that flexibility is key. You'll get the sizing and pricing information through the Catalyst tool when you sit down with C3 and run it. And then from an island perspective, you have the ability to fail over as granularly as individual machines, and you have the ability to restore back as individual as file, folder, disk, and virtual machines as well. That flexibility is so key where you're not sitting there saying, I don't really need to fail over everything, so I won't, right? You need to have the flexibility you need so you actually take action and get the results you want, but it's a great question.
Super. You can go ahead and advance to the next slide. This is where we want to open it up to, I believe we're at there, the questions and answers from the audience. And there may be questions that pop up here. So Laura, if you can help us field those. If not, I do have some more questions that my clients have brought up that I want you to answer that helps draw out a little bit more about this putting together a plan.
Okay, yeah, that's great, Drew. We have about 20 more minutes left if we want to go through a couple of those questions.
Okay. So one thing that is on top of mind from a lot of clients right now is ransomware. We touched on it, but we didn't specifically dive into it. And so I'm going to pose this to Jack first. Ransomware, how does Island address this, or how does Island mitigate some of that disaster or cyber threat with specific focus on ransomware?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think it goes back to the threat you mentioned before of the retention gaps. That's a really big thing to focus on here. With ransomware and with some of the other threats we mentioned as well, it's commonly that latest point in time, it's already too late for that data, right? So there's a couple acronyms to bring up that many on the audience may be familiar with today, and if not, again, the C3 team can help you with these, RPO and RTO. So real quick thing for you to know in the audience, if you're not familiar with them, RPO is basically recovery point. You can think of this as how fresh is the data I'm failing over to. And as you can imagine, if you're in the audience today, you're thinking, I want the freshest data possible. RTO is how long does it take to spin up that copy of the data, right? When I declare the DR event, I click the big blue button in the Island console. How long does it take to bring things up? Both of these are critical for ransom attacks and the other threats, but ransom attacks in particular have this nature of the latest data is not the best. So one of the things that Island can help you a lot with, and again, talk to your C3 advisor on this, is the ability to have RPOs, or freshness of data, in single-digit seconds, where you can literally rewind back in time to just before an event happened. And that can be very key, again, to you as an organization looking and saying, I don't want to fail over to day-old data. It might actually be better to pay the ransom, right? You have to make sure that the recovery option is that much more beneficial than it is to take the other way out there. So that's one thing, is we make it very easy through the Island console to go in and say, I have thousands of points in time I can restore to. I can select the exact second and restore my entire application or entire site to that point in time. That's key. The other key piece is when an event like that happens, it is incredibly disrupting. So being able to bring up an environment quickly is also the other key. So one of the things Island does for that is, again, we mentioned that VMware compatibility and the ability to do that through Catalyst, pre-check, make sure everything's going to work. Our average time, our actual published recovery time per virtual machine failover to Island is 1 to 2 minutes, not hours, not days, but 1 to 2 minutes. And when you're in a pinch and you have that disruption, and legitimately, as you know, with ransomware type threats, you have unusable data. You are not accessing that data. Being able to spend that to the exact moment and doing so in a matter of minutes is key for recovery there, amongst other things as well. Great question, Drew.
Great. Now, Pat and George, I'm going to bounce the ball over to you too. A threat blocker, you're blocking at the gate. Can you help with ransomware? Tell me about what your position is there.
Yeah, let me. This is it couldn't be a better question actually for both Jack and us. This is the case where you need both of us. So Jack just described exactly why you need Island. You have to recover your network. You have to go get back up and running. We can stop a threat in its tracks, but the issue is when we stop it, right? So think about how a ransomware attack would happen. So if somebody gets into the network through a side door, right? We've already done our job. We blocked them at the front door, but they got in through a side door. They have not revealed themselves as a ransom attack yet. They haven't shut the network down, right? They haven't hit the thing and said, give me my ransom or your network, or I have turned your network off, pay the ransom. They haven't done that yet. What they have done is tried to steal your data, because that's their second ransom demand. So they go in, they're now trying to get out with a big old basket full of your customer data, and then they're going to shut your network down. And why do they do that? Because they know you've engaged with Island or somebody like them, and they know you're going to get your network back up and running eventually. And you're going to say, pound sand, I'm not paying the ransom. I'm back up running as of yesterday, or as of 10 seconds ago, or as of 5 minutes ago, or whatever that is. And I'm not going to pay you. And then they say, well, great, I'm glad your network's back up. I still have your data. I exfiltrated it while you weren't watching, because you didn't have anything in place to block on the outbound side if you didn't have threat block. So that's why you need us, and that's why you need Island. Very simple.
That begs the question then, where does threat blocker sit in the network? Do you use probes, or describe that a little bit for our audience?
Pat, I'll let you talk.
Yeah, I'll take that. And yeah, absolutely. We sit as what's called a layer 2 bump in the wire. And it can either sit on premise. Typically what we'll say to people is, to make it easy decision for you, wherever you have a next-gen firewall, put us right next to that point in your network. If it's an on-premise firewall, put an on-premise threat blocker there. If it's running in VMware, put us in VMware. If it's running in AWS or Azure, put us in AWS or Azure. Right? Wherever you have a firewall, put us right next to it. That's really the best practice. But to George's point and to Jack's point about ransomware and how this is a multi-pronged problem, and I'm going to say something I said already, because the bad guys are smart, right? If they were dumb, they wouldn't have exfiltrated your data, and now ILAN just solved your problem and you're done. But these guys are really smart. ILAN solves your problem of getting back up and running, but if they leak all your data out, maybe you don't have a job the next day, right? Maybe the authorities come in and shut you down. Any number of things can happen, right? If you're in financials, healthcare, energy, any of these critical sectors, and you have a breach like this, you're in big trouble, right? I'm going to read you an actual quote from a customer that suspects that what was happening was an attempted ransomware attack. This is a direct quote from an existing threat blocker customer. As of about late last fall, we got this quote, and I quote, "We had a user download a malicious file and run it. Somehow this file got past our ForcePoint website filtering, Cisco Firepower firewall, and SentinelOne software. Our Dell SecureWorks quickly alerted us to the issue, but it was Bandura threat blocker that saved the day and prevented information from being exfiltrated. Thank you, Bandura." And that just reiterates George's point about it's that data exfiltration piece, that second phase, that smart part of that attack is where they're still going to try to get you even after you've recovered. We stop that from happening. Really, really critical. And it's not magic what we're doing. I want to be really clear. What we're doing is not magic. What we're doing is we know who these bad guys are, right? And highly likely that you're not the first person to get attacked. Somebody else has been attacked before you by that same attack vector. The only real thing that we see in the industry that's different than that is when nation states are involved. And I come out of the intelligence community here in the US, so I'm pretty familiar with how that stuff works. And I can tell you that it's highly likely that companies like Webroot, Domain Tools, Proofpoint, are key partners providing this data, already have the information about the guys attacking you. And now you're able to leverage that in real time with ThreatBlocker sitting as a layer 2 bump on the wire anywhere in your network, to Drew's exact question of where we get deployed. Anywhere you decide to put us, and our best practice is put us everywhere you have a firewall, right next to it.
Right. I appreciate that. Playing devil's advocate, I speak to a lot of clients and they say, look, it sounds great up front and I got to deploy this thing. All right. So we make an investment in partnership, and you know what, now it's another digital mouth to feed. Talk to me about post-implementation. How much management is required? Because the last thing we want to do is saddle our clients with another tool that requires heavy overhead management. What's required, after it's deployed from a management perspective? Pat, how about you go first?
Absolutely. One of the reasons I joined this company when I did about 2.5 years ago now was when I saw how simple the product was. They took a really complicated problem and simplified it. By getting rid of all the hard management work you would normally have to do, you don't have to worry about pulling in all this partner data. You don't have to curate it. You don't have to push it back out. You don't have to make sure you implement it in a way that doesn't cause you network latency problems. The solution does all of that for you. So we have a lot of customers that literally plug us in, apply power, and since we're a bump on the wire, they plug in 2 network cables and they're done. And they don't touch it ever again. Now, I don't like those customers. I want people to be involved, right? We have a web-based management platform running in AWS where they can always go and log in and see their exact security posture right now with respect to that threat intelligence that's running real time for them. They can tweak it. They can do false positive mitigation if they need to. I would say that's probably the #1 kind of a medium lift that a customer would have, a really complex customer, is when they're going in and doing that extra level of tweaks, but it's entirely up to them whether or not they do it. You can either treat it as a set it and forget it, and you truly can, and it just works for you, or you can go that extra mile and configure it to your heart's content. Entirely up to your level of expertise. We have the smallest mom and pops using us who can't spell IT, all the way up to global Fortune 500 companies deployed in 13 countries around the world, right? So it doesn't matter your level of expertise, we can handle it, and the management lift is minuscule.
And it was a leading question because I wanted to draw that out. It's one of the reasons that we are recommending ThreatBlocker, because it is a low lift. We don't want to saddle our clients with another heavy tool. So Jack, same thing for you. With DR plans, as soon as you write a DR policy book or a recovery plan, once that thing is printed and put it on the shelf, it's outdated. How much care and feeding does ILAN require from a DR perspective to manage and keep updated? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I highlighted earlier on is, for those of you that have had the pleasure or displeasure of running your own DR site, you understand that all there is duplicated efforts, right? Updating both sides, managing both sides, growing capacity at both sides. So simply by moving to the cloud in general, you eliminate a lot of that. From an island perspective, and I mentioned the word expertise, and I try not to throw around that word lightly. We are the largest Veeam, VMware, and Zerto cloud provider from a disaster recovery perspective globally. And so there's a lot of expertise that goes into that. And for those of you that have set up a DR site before, it's not as simple as just putting in data, putting in software and saying, I'm going to move things, right? There's organization, there's other aspects to that. There's the testing, there's the planning piece of it. So of course, upfront, run Catalyst with the C3 team, understand what you need to do, understand the compatibility. But from there, Island procures the site that you need. We do based on storage capacity, and then ultimately a lot of our customers choose to use CPU and RAM on demand, right? Until they need it, they don't want to pay for it, and that's great. All of the networking set up in advance. All the IP addresses are available in advance. In fact, one of the great things about the Threat Blocker team, right? Virtual firewall appliance, you could actually put one of those in Island as well and have that pre-configured in advance as well, treating the Island site like your future production environment. We have a self-service option that a lot of customers use. As you saw at the console, it's very intuitive. It's based on VMware. It's based on our own proprietary console, and customers love it. They can fail over at any time, test it any time, and do so in an isolated bubble network. However, there are customers out there that say, I don't want to touch it. I want someone else to run the tests for me. I want someone else to run the failover and failback for me. And that's where it's really good to talk through to the C3 team in Island, is we have fully managed offerings that we can do as well. And some of those have to do with working with technical account managers that'll do routine checks of the environment to say, let's cover what you've added. Let's make sure it's protected. Let's make sure it's in the correct groups. Because again, preaching the choir for all of us here, the only constant in IT is change, and we need to make sure as change happens that you continue to be updated, protected, and more importantly though, validated, because we'll continue to test and do real failovers of those new machines as well. But we're here for you, and I know your team is as well, Drew, but we eliminated a lot of the headaches because of the expertise and experience there for sure.
Super. Laura, do we have any questions from the audience at this point?
No, mostly just a lot of thanks from people for this presentation.
Okay, great. Well, Jack, you pointed out something here, and I think we're going to kind of set this down here just a little bit early, since we've covered a lot of ground. Is in IT, the only change, the only constant is change, and the rate at which that change is happening keeps accelerating. So C3 sits in the middle of this, and again, I want to thank Island and Threat Blocker for having this discussion with us, because we're trying to bring best of breed providers to our clients, illustrate some of what you can do specifically today in the cybersecurity arena. And maybe this is just some ideas. You know what, we want to have a different conversation. Guys, can you help me with this? If this sounded interesting, reach out to C3. We're happy to engage in conversation, understand where you're at today, where you want to go, and bring forward providers just like Island, just like Threat Blocker, to help you augment what you're doing today. So with that, I want to thank you for joining with us. You can email me, get in touch with your C3 advisor, and we're happy to continue the conversation. So with that, thank you all for joining, and wish you a good rest of the day.
Thank you.